Good afternoon. Today is March 4th, 2021. And you're right, it's already the fire prevention month. So far, there are no fire cases reported here in CNSC. So I am here today together with my team to discuss about the different types of fire hazards. But before we proceed to discussing the different types of fire hazards, let me first introduce myself. I am Francis Leybay and I'm going to discuss about fire tetrahedron, and different stages of fire. So we all know that fire has been used for thousands of years by early humans for survival, and their control of fire has brought them a long way. It has been one of the primary tools in building ancient and even modern civilizations. Until today, fire still plays an essential role in a man's daily life. It is still being used in cooking, baking, heating, lighting, metal tools forging, and even in power generation. It also plays a natural role in effecting necessary changes in ecosystems. It influences the type and population of flora and fauna in a forest where fire is known to recur. Despite its various uses, when fire is unchecked or uncontrolled, its destructive side is revealed. So, what is fire? Fire was considered by the ancient Greeks as a major element, just like earth, water, and air. However, unlike earth, water, and air, which take the form of solid, liquid, and gas, respectively, fire is not the form of matter. It is indeed tangible, its flame can be seen, its heat can be felt, and smoke can be smelled, but is actually just a manifestation of matter changing from one state to another. For example, the boiling of water and the fire is from the stove or from another medium, and the melting of ice, which is accelerated by the presence of fire. Fire is also a part of a chemical reaction called oxidation. Oxidation involves the combination of oxygen and another substance. It is a very familiar process which many people may not be aware of. It is responsible for the brown color that develops on the face of an apple or a potato few minutes later after it's been cut. It is also responsible for the tarnishing of silver utensils and jewelry, and also the corrosion of iron. Fire is set apart from the oxidation processes by its rate. It takes place rapidly and produces light in the form of flame, heat, sound, smoke, and many other byproducts. The picture here represents the fire tetrahedron. The fire tetrahedron, as you can see, is almost like a pyramid. It is a visual aid that represents the four important ingredients required to initiate and sustain fire. You can see the heat, fuel, oxygen, produced by the oxidizing agent, and the uninhibited chemical reaction. When all four ingredients are present at the right amount, a fire will naturally occur. Hence, removing at least one of the ingredients can prevent or extinguish any fire. It might seem very simple, but it is actually a great analogy on how you can theoretically put out fire through the creation of a barrier using foam, for example, and starving the fire of oxygen. A spray foam increases the fire resistance. If you want to eliminate or divert the fuel, you have to apply water to lower the temperature below the ignition temperature or in a flammable liquid, interfering with the chemical chain reaction through the elimination of free radicals. So free radicals are unstable molecules produced by the breaking of chemical bonds during combustion. Using BCF, a BCF is a fire extinguishing agent, and other halon extinguishers also leads to the creation of an inert gas barrier. To further elaborate on the fire tetrahedron, let's discuss each of the ingredients. So the first one is heat. Heat is the energy that flows from an object of higher temperature to an object of lower temperature. It should be of an amount which is enough to liberate the vapor from the solid and liquid forms of fuel and cause ignition. Heat can be produced in many ways, both by man and by nature. Early humans used friction between the surfaces of two objects, like sticks being rubbed against each other, to convert kinetic energy into heat. Lightning strikes during thunderstorms, on the other hand, reach temperatures of almost 30,000 degrees Celsius. It is almost 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun, and these lightning strikes can start wildfires. Heat can be transferred in different ways, but I will discuss that later after I discuss the different components of the fire tetrahedron. The next component is fuel. Fuel is any solid, liquid, or gaseous substance that can be burned. For combustion to take place, solid and liquid fuels must be converted into the gaseous state through pyrolysis and vaporization, respectively. Gaseous fuels ignite and burn readily and do not require the application of additional heat before combustion. The next component is the oxidizing agent, which can be also called as oxidizer or oxidant. It is an element or a compound which releases oxygen or other oxidizers during a chemical reaction. The most common oxidizing agent is oxygen. That's why it is the one represented in the fire tetrahedron. So air typically contains approximately 21% oxygen. An oxidizing agent itself does not burn. Rather, it supports combustion when combined with a fuel. Other oxidizing agents are bromates, bromine, chlorates, chlorine, etc. And the last component of the fire tetrahedron is the uninhibited chemical chain reaction. Combustion or burning becomes self-sustained because the heat given off during the process is used again to fuel and maintain the burning. The initial ignition source is no longer necessary and the fire continues unless it becomes deprived of one of the main elements. Clean agent halon replacements are used to break these chain reactions. Let's proceed to the three main ways to transfer heat. So the image in here is provided by NASA, which highlights how all three heat transfer methods, the conduction, convection, and radiation, work in the same environment. So let's discuss about the conduction. So conduction involves the direct contact of substances, typically solids, for heat to be transferred. It is a process by which heat energy is transmitted through collisions between neighboring atoms or molecules. Conduction transfers heat via direct molecular collision. An area of greater kinetic energy will transfer thermal energy to an area with lower kinetic energy. Higher speed particles will collide with lower speed particles. The slower speed particles will increase its kinetic energy as a result. Conduction is the most common form of heat transfer. The next one is the convection. Convection involves the flow of liquids and gases in the transfer of heat. When liquids and gases are heated, they expand. The reason why they expand is because when a fluid is heated, it travels away from the source and carries the thermal energy along. The fluid above the hot surface expands, becomes less dense, and rises. This explains why the fluid in the photo is rising. So the next is the radiation. Radiation is a manner of heat transfer that involves only electromagnetic waves, like sunlight or flames. The heat absorbed by a substance is greater if it is closer to the source. So this type of heating explains why a piece of paper or a dry leaf burns when light is focused on it using a magnifying glass. Note that all materials radiate thermal energy based on their temperatures. The hotter an object, the more it will radiate. The sun is a clear example of heat radiation that transfers heat across the solar system. While at normal room temperatures, objects radiate as infrared rays. Discuss the different stages of fire. So overall, there are 4 stages of fire, and the first one is the ignition or the incipient stage. At this stage, all 4 requirements for a fire have been combined. So these 4 requirements are those which are in the fire tetrahedron. The fire in this stage is still very small and it can still be controlled by a portable fire extinguisher or a small hose line. It may even go out on its own, but we should not count on this. The second stage is the growth stage. This is the shortest stage of all 4 stages. Heat release rate increases as a result of the burning of additional fuel. Enhanced air circulation promotes fire growth as more oxygen becomes available. More surfaces are ignited by means of convection and radiation. The next stage is the fully developed fire stage. So in this stage, fire has consumed almost all the available combustive materials. This stage is where the energy release is at its greatest. Temperature will be at its highest point, generally somewhere between 700 degrees Celsius to 1200 degrees Celsius. Fully developed fires can be identified by these following factors. So the first one is the darkened or black smoke. The darker the smoke, the more volatile the fire is, while the gray smoke can indicate that the fire is slowing down and running out of materials to burn. The second indicator is the dense smoke. The thicker the smoke, the more likely a hostile event to spread. Air soaking into thick smoke means a vent limited fire that is likely to grow explosively. The third indicator is the substantial heat. The fourth indicator is the blackened window glazing. The fifth indicator is the visible exterior flames and flames obscured by smoke. The fourth and the last stage is the decay stage. This stage lasts the longest. It occurs when oxygen in fuel begins to diminish. Fire consumes the remaining fuel. The temperature decreases significantly and the fire becomes weaker. However, weak fire without flame can cause a new fire if not entirely extinguished. There is also a possibility that backdraft may occur. Backdraft is an explosive fire that happens due to the sudden introduction of oxygen into an enclosed structure, which has been deprived of air for quite some time. This is why it is not safe to go into a house during a fire to save your belongings, pets, or even other people.
Reporting live from Diet Camarines Norte, my name is Alexanet A. Mabeza. I will be helping you understand the behavior of fire and the causes and the different types of wildfires, which will be helpful in learning how to prevent and prepare for this type of natural disaster. Wildfires. Wildfire is any natural or anthropogenic caused uncontrolled fire in remote areas where there is extensive combustible vegetation and organic materials. Wildfires can occur naturally or can be induced by humans. An object is combustible if the chemical reaction combustion occurs. It is the combination of fuel, oxygen, temperature, which can produce fire. Wildfires can spread from the source ignition very quickly and can change direction unexpectedly. In most cases, the behavior of wildfires is influenced by the wind due to its ability to vary greatly in speed and in direction. The winds can increase the supply of oxygen, giving the fire more intensity. Winds can scatter burning debris, which could trigger fires in other places. This usually happens with lightweight fuels or materials such as leaves. Burning leaves can start fire where the wind carries it or to where it lands. Winds can also spread despite the presence of gaps in combustible materials. Um, there are places where some vegetation have wide gaps. These gaps can seem meaningless, especially when the wind is strong, because the winds can bend or extend the reach of the flames, which can cause you the burning of the nearby fuels or materials. Although I've only mentioned the wind as a factor, there are two other types of factors which influences the behavior of fire, which is the topography and the types of fuels. Topography is the natural or man-made configuration of the Earth's surface. It involves the slope, the escalation, and the aspects of a certain place. While the types of fuels, it also plays a part in the fire's behavior. It pertains to the living and the decomposing materials, which serves as an energy source for combustion. It is also important to remember that when a wildfire is reported to have support from the wind or the other factors, this means that the fire will burn with greater intensity and spread more rapidly. On the other hand, if a wildfire does not have support from any of the environmental factors, the the intensity and the rate of speed decreases. Now let's head on to the types of wildfires. The classification of wildfires depends on two factors. The first one is the vertical position of the fuel in burning, and the second one is the type of fuel being burned. These factors can also determine how quickly a fire spread. Surface fire. This is the most common type of wildfire, spreading in surface fuels including grass, leaves, shrubs, needles, and litter. Surface fires are usually not as intense as the other types. An abundance of accumulated fuel on the ground, especially if these have been dried up during droughts or dry spells, allows surface fires to induce ground fires. The other type is the ground fires. Ground fires involve burning of buried, decomposed organic matter and extensive root system. It consumes the organic and combustible material beneath the surface. Although these fires usually spread slowly and may go it can be dangerous because it can resurface along any of the large network of routes. Ground fires also have the tendency to sond- to burn in a longer period of time. Um, it doesn't pose as that much as threat compared to the other types, but we cannot deny the fact that it is hard to extinguish due to the lack of accessibility beneath the ground since it's literally underground, burning underground. The last type is the crown fires. Crown fires burn tree canopies, other higher parts of trees, and suspended materials like vines. The extent and the intensity of a crown fire is controlled by the density of the suspended material, the height and the continuity of the canopies, and the intensity of ground and surface fires which may spread upward. So yeah, as mentioned, ground fires can start as a ground fire or can start as a surface fires. Although it can be dependent or independent. Uh, Ground fires usually occur in forest fires, due to the continuity of the crowns. Forest fire in forests, trees are usually grouped together. They are near each other, which means that there are more materials for the fire to burn. It is also extremely difficult to extinguish and control. The causes of wildfires. Natural causes. Many wildfires are triggered by the tremendous heat associated with lightning strikes. However, in the Philippines, wildfires triggered by lightning strikes are unheard of, which means it hasn't happened before. Wildfires are favored during the thunderstorms that are accompanied by little to no rain. Lava flows during volcanic eruptions ignite almost anything that they come into contact with and can trigger wildfires. This shows how natural causes are much harder to control, and we're best not to meddle with it. Just try to survive. Wildfires can also occur due to spontaneous combustion of highly combustible fuels in forests due to extremely hot weather. When a material suddenly reaches its threshold point, or the so-called flash point, it can suddenly burn into flames. Regions that experience extended hot and dry weather but have enough moisture for vegetation to grow are favorable for the occurrence of forest fires. Wildfires can also proliferate, especially during dry spells, droughts, or heat waves. Rockfalls can also trigger wildfires because of the sparks caused by the friction between rock or between rocks or wood. It is also similar to how we humans used to make fire in the past, like long ago, which is by through rubbing two rocks or by making friction between rocks and wood. Wildfires are also anthropogenically caused. In the Philippines, human activities are responsible for the majority of reported wildfires. Humans wittingly or unwittingly start wildfires. There are wildfires which were started intentionally, but most probably went out of control, such as kaingin or the slash and burn method and charcoal production. However, accidental fires can be started by leaving lighted cigarettes or unextinguished or improperly extinguished bonfires at campsites within the forest. It is the understanding of how these influences the behavior of fires along with the different types of wildfires is important in developing a safe and effective plan for wildfires.
Good afternoon. My report will be about controlling and preventing wildfires as well as building fires with emphasis on house fires and the classifications of fires. So, controlling and preventing wildfires. So, in order to prevent wildfires, especially forest fires that happen the most in the Philippines, there are certain practices that can be applied, policies that can be implemented, and infrastructure that can be built. Though not all wildfires should be prevented. Natural wildfires are beneficial to the ecosystem and therefore should be allowed so long as it does not pose a risk to people's lives and properties. However, man made wildfires should always be prevented. A key step to control the occurrence of wildfires is to ensure that forests are well maintained. Basically, its primary objective is to minimize the amount of unwanted flammable substances and to break the vertical and horizontal continuity of fuels. So, young forests are most vulnerable to fires because they can be severely damaged to the point that they are unable to undergo renewal. Now, the likelihood of fires in young forests can be reduced by isolating them, making fire breaks, and reducing the quantity of flammable materials. One of the techniques that we can use is called grazing. It can be done to reduce fuel-like brushes and to prevent fires from starting and spreading. However, in mature forests, there are more established ways or methods of maintenance such as sanitation, which is the continuous removal of dead, dried up sick trees, thinning, the removal of less developed and dying trees every 7 to 10 years, while maintaining the normal density level of forests. Pruning, which is the removal of lower branches of a tree reaching one-third of its height, which may reach as high as 4 meters, particularly in recreational areas, and along trails where there is a higher risk for fires. Removal of cuttings and other tree waste and material. Cuttings and other wastes can be transported to the side of the road or be burned in clearings. Fire breaks and grazing lines are an obstacle to the spread of fire, such as a strip of open space in a forest. Forest fires can be further reduced through community participation in fire prevention as fire volunteers and in publicity and education efforts, such as passing and enforcing legislation that requires maintenance of forests and imposing penalties for committing acts that are harmful to the forests. Now, there are also several infrastructures and implements that can be provided to respond quickly and effectively in the event of a fire. These are access roads, water supply facilities, manned watchtowers that are used for early and accurate location of a forest fire, posting signs that are mobile direction signs used to guide firefighting forces to the location of the fire and to warn them of vehicular limitations and dead ends. So, building fires with emphasis on house fires. Over the years, countless great fires have wreaked havoc. It isn't uncommon to hear of neighborhoods and communities being displaced because of fires, especially during the summer months. Fire has claimed so many lives and turned many properties to ashes. It is a common saying that it is better to fall prey to thieves 10 times than to have one's house razed by fire. So, how do we stop fire properly once it has already started? Or better yet, how do we prevent fire in the first place? To know the answer to that, we must first know the causes of building fires. The first cause of building fires is unattended cooking equipment and other household fire sources. So, when cooking or baking, we should take extra caution, especially when using oil, because if the oil is overheated, it might ignite. Also, cooking equipment such as stoves, ovens, deep fryers, and barbecue grill should not be left unattended. And also, we should avoid handling any of these when we are under the influence of alcohol. A safe distance should be maintained between flammable materials like dish towels, tissue papers, and dried grass, and the cooking equipment. The regulator of the liquid petroleum gas should be turned off when not in use to avoid leaks. The tank should also be kept away from direct sunlight and at least a meter away from anything that releases heat. Always check for possible leaks. The smell of an LPG additive called ethyl mercaptan makes the detection of a leak easier. We should also avoid cigarette smoking, especially when in bed or furnitures, because it can cause fires. To prevent this, we should designate a place in our home that we can smoke. We should also have a proper and preferably a large and deep ashtray. Candles, gas lamps, and mosquito coils should be placed on a sturdy place and not on a wobbly or shakily surface, because a wobbly table can be toppled by children, pets, or wind and can cause fires. Make sure to always extinguish such fire sources before leaving the home or before going to sleep. Now, children may also be a cause of fire out of curiosity or mischief, so we must put matches and lighters away from their reach, and we should educate them about the nature of fire and the consequences of playing with it. When dealing with a fire that involves heated oil or grease, we should never use water because the superheated water expands rapidly and can cause further spread of flames. Next is electrical appliances and wiring problems. Counterfeit, uncertified electrical appliances, DIY electrical projects, and worn out or skinned power cords presents both fire and electric shock hazards. Overloading through octopus wiring and plugging too many high wattage appliances and outlets, especially those that release heat, like hair dryers and electric kettles, may also cause failure of the appliances and can cause fire. Improper house wiring can also cause a fire, which is why licensed electricians should be hired for installations. Power cords that run under the carpet or any flammable material, like furniture, also present a fire hazard. Smoke is usually an indicator when something is going wrong with an appliance or electrical wiring. Now, in a case of electrical fire, it is extremely dangerous to use water because it can cause or it may result in electrocution. And sometimes simply turning off the power of the appliance or the house's main electrical panel may not be enough because the fire might have already spread and we just don't see it. It might be obscured, maybe behind hollow walls or above ceilings. Uncertified or worn out decorative lights should be avoided to prevent fire. Avoid leaving them overnight or when no one is at home. Third is the haphazardly stored flammable liquids and other easily combustible materials. Dangerous fluids like gasoline, propane, butane, etc. should be stored in tightly sealed containers and be placed far away from sharp objects that can puncture the container. They should also be placed away from direct sunlight and water that can cause corrosion. Another reason to put the container away from direct sunlight is because these liquids can easily catch fire merely due to high temperatures, cinders, or sparks of static electricity. Farming products such as hay, different sorts of grain, and cotton must not be stored in places where spontaneous ignition might happen. Last is arson. Arson is the unlawful act of intentionally burning buildings, vehicles, farmland, and other property using chemicals, bombs, and etc. to inflict damage for whatever reason. Now, it may be impossible to totally prevent such a planned act, especially by another human being. Having somebody to look over your property while you are away can be helpful in preventing a fire or preventing it from further spreading. There are many reasons for committing arson. These include vandalism, excitement and revenge, crime concealment, profit, and extremism. Of these, arson for profit is the most common motive of arsonists. It is done for monetary gain from fire insurance, getting rid of business competitions, extortion, destroying unwanted buildings to upgrade real estate values, or evading financial obligations. To fight fire, we must first know the different classifications of fire. Now, fire is classified according to the materials being burned in the area. There is Class A, which composed of ordinary combustibles, Class B, that include flammable liquids, Class C, that include live electrical equipment, Class D, that include combustible metals, and Class K, which include commercial cooking equipments. So Class A involves fuels such as cloth, wood, paper, plastics, rubber, and trash. To put out this kind of fire, we should make the fuel cool down below ignition temperature. For these types of fires, simply using water can put out the fire. Class B. It involves combustible liquid fuel such as alcohol, gasoline, and etc. It also includes combustible gas fuels such as propane and butane. These fires are very hazardous and usually hard to extinguish, and is extinguished by forming a blockade between oxygen and the fuel. For instance, by applying a layer of foam. Class C. This involves fuels that belong either to Class A or Class B, but also involve powered electrical equipment like home appliances, motors, and transformers. This type of fire requires special techniques and agents like carbon dioxide or dry chemical agents. Now, these are very hard to extinguish with water because it's very dangerous, and it is out of the question to use water to extinguish these kinds of fires. Class D. This involves combustible metals such as aluminum, lithium, magnesium, potassium, and etc. that can be found mostly in automobiles. Now, extinguishing fires like these are very difficult just by using water because the extremely high temperatures can cause the hydrogen and oxygen to split, which may result in stronger combustion and even explosion. We use salt-based special powders and clean dry sand to extinguish this kind of fires. Class K. These involve fuels such as cooking oils and greases. Now, extinguishing this type of fire is also very dangerous if you're just going to use water. Only a fully protected firefighter should deal with such fires.
Knowledge about fire extinguishers are really handful, if ever that there are presence of fire alarming. I think many of you don't have enough knowledge about fire extinguishers since the primary use of it is to manipulate fire that are very rare to happen in our households if we are responsible individuals. But knowing things about fire extinguishing can be used in time of emergency or unexpected incident. One knowledge is that extinguishers came from different types and not only one for all class of fires. Fire also came from different classes, that's why not all extinguishers are appropriate to use for putting out a fire. Some can put several classes of fire while others can be dangerous when used for a certain class of fire. Amateurs or starters should know what fire is being identified in order to use the right extinguishers for it. Once the class of fire is identified, most appropriate extinguisher must be chosen. Consequences may occur if you make use of inappropriate extinguishers to put out the fire. Worst cases is that instead of extinguishing the fire, you just made it worse because of using inappropriate fire extinguishers for that kind of fire. So next, we have here the characteristics or types of commercially available fire extinguishers. The first one, we have water and foam. Water and foam extinguishers isolate the heat element while foam extinguishers block oxygen to prevent it from interacting with other elements in the fire tetrahedron. Water extinguishers are only advisable to use for Class A and not B or C fires. Differently, foam extinguishers have the ability to put out Class A and B fires. They are most suited to extinguishing liquid fires such as petrol or diesel and are more versatile than water jet extinguishers because they can also be used on solids and woods such as in woods and paper. The second one, we have here carbon dioxide fire extinguishers. Here, they isolate the oxygen from the fuel in the fire tetrahedron and also reduce the heat due to the very cold emission. Carbon dioxide extinguishers do not leave any residue, unlike the foam extinguisher. They can also be used on Class B fires, those involving flammable liquids such as paraffin or petrol. Followed by dry chemical extinguishers. Dry chemical extinguishers put out the fire mainly by breaking the continuity of the chemical reaction of the fire tetrahedron. The mostly used extinguishers is the multi-purpose one, which is able to put out Class A, B, and C fires. The fourth one, we have here the wet chemical. Wet chemical extinguishers remove the fire in the tetrahedron and prevent fire from restarting by means of preventing the oxygen and fuel from interacting. Wet chemical fire extinguishers are filled with potassium. This potassium cools and lowers the temperature of the fire, therefore stopping the fire from spreading. So aside from them, we also have here clean agent fire extinguishers. They are also known as halogenated extinguishers that contains halon agents and halocarbon agents. These put out the fire mainly by breaking the continuity of the chemical reaction of the fire tetrahedron, meaning they extinguish the fire by interrupting the chemical reaction of the fire triangle, and are commonly used for type B and C fires. Also, we have here dry powder fire extinguishers. Dry powder fire extinguishers extinguish the fire primarily by interrupting the chemical reaction taking place and cutting off the oxygen supply. These extinguishers only put out Class D fires by preventing the oxygen to interact with fuel. They can be used on fires involving solid combustibles, flammables, liquids, and electricity. And the last type is the water mist. The water mist fire extinguishers is clean and safe. It creates no risk to the occupants nor damage to the surrounding equipment. Water mist extinguishers primarily put out Class A fire but could also work as well for C fires. There are just some of the settings where our water mist is ideal, such as in hospitals, cleaning rooms, historic buildings, old and delicate materials, server, electrical room, and mainly in the ceilings of these various infrastructure. So now, aside from different types of fire extinguishers, we also have rules for fighting a fire. 3 important rules to remember during a fire, which is called a 3A's. These 3A's are activate, assist, and attempt. The first is activate. Activate the building's fire alarm system or dial 117 to notify the fire department of the incident. We primarily need to do this so that the fire can be contained in a small amount of time. The second one, assist. Assist anybody who is in need of help to escape the building without putting your own life at risk. If you have still the ability and time to respond with others,
take it without risking your
life. Fire is dangerous, especially within contact to people. Use precautionary measures to assist someone who is in need. And the last day is attempt. Attempt to put out the fire only after doing this. This pertaining to the activate and assist. Always keep in mind that the lives of you and others are the most important during a fire incident. Before putting out the fire, make sure that the lives at stake are not present. Putting out the fire is nonsense if the lives of others are being out first. Lives matter and we all know that. And take note, in some instances, you can still manage to extinguish a fire on your own before it becomes bigger. In connection, there are things that need to be considered when putting out a fire. The first one is the size of the fire. There's a big chance of successfully extinguishing a fire while it is still small and contained. The second one is the presence of toxic smoke. If you are at risk of being suffocated by smoke, especially from burning materials, of toxic materials, it is most probably unsafe to extinguish from the fire on your own. The third one, a means of escape. Only attempt to put out the fire on your own if you have a sure and planned route of escape in case the fire becomes unmanageable to extinguish. And the last one is the instinct. Your senses will tell you if the state of your situation is safe or not. And aside from that, you can try to put out the fire on your own. If the risk is too high, don't attempt to do things that will surely harm you. So, for the next part, we have here the fire extinguishers used and maintenance. It is important to first have a record of the location and types of fire extinguishers in your building. You should familiarize yourself with the parts of the fire extinguishers and learn how to operate them. Because knowing is not enough, we must also apply the things we know in order to be ready in any situations. It is also useful to try handling a fire extinguisher to have a feel of how heavy it is and how to carry it properly. You may also ask your fire extinguisher distributor on how to properly handle them, maintain and operate them if you are alone, so that you will be able to manage and use the fire extinguishers by yourself. Also, spend time to read the manual and other notes on the fire extinguisher label. And we also have here a helpful mnemonic code in how to use a fire extinguisher during an emergency. This mnemonic code is what we call PASS. which primarily means pull the pin, aim the fire extinguisher's hose at the base of the fire or at the bottom part that can be considered as a source. Also, squeeze the lever to dispense the extinguishing agent, and the last is to sweep the hose sideways until the fire is extinguished. An important note about this is that fire extinguishers should be regularly inspected and maintained according to the specifications indicated on the user's manual. So, what is the importance of inspecting and maintaining the specifications of certain fire extinguishers? So, mainly, visually inspecting your fire extinguisher helps ensure that several important points, such as the extinguisher is still present in its designated location, no damage has occurred to the equipment, and no obstructions are blocking the equipment from view or from easy access, so that in every situation you can still manage to get access to that fire extinguishers and use it to manipulate the fire. And that's all for this report. Thank you for listening.